Welcome back to Timo's Dinky Detailing. Today I'm going to be doing a Dinky Studebaker oil tanker. This is a toy that I got in a group of other toys. At first I wasn't even sure if it's a Dinky toy. All the other ones were. This one seems very lightweight, and obviously it doesn't have Dinky tires or wheels on it. It has appears to be a block of wood inside, and there's a screw in the very top that's not supposed to be there. It's obviously also very play worn. So after looking online, I was able to find this toy, and it is in fact the Dinky toy. Probably most people recognize it if you're a Dinky fan. This one doesn't have its original base, doesn't have its original wheels or axles. So obviously what's happened is somehow the base has come off, and somebody has repaired this for their child. So here's a machine cut brass screw in the top and a couple of nice looking stainless screws in the bottom. So this was a handy father, I imagine. It's been lovingly repaired so that the child could go back to playing with it, although I don't know how the heck he got the base off of it. So there's a piece of galvanized sheet metal base, nicely made to fit, and inside a block of wood that was held on with that screw on the outside. And this is interesting. It's some kind of spool. I remember this from my childhood. So if you've ever seen one of these, remember it from the 60s. It's about 1 inch wide. It looks too thin to be a film spool, but it could be from some sewing material that my mother had. I remember these as a child looking at them and thinking, well, it's not wheels and an axle, but it sure looks like wheels and an axle. And obviously some father lovingly used these to repair his son's Dinky toy. So it's got a nice history to it. Obviously the paint is done on it. But otherwise it looks like, aside from missing a base, it's in pretty good condition. Now, in order to fit these spools in there as wheels, he also ground out the normal axle size of loop that's down there. So I'm going to have to fill that in order to repair it. And so today I'm going back. I'm using the paint stripper instead of the caustic soda, because to do the caustic soda, I did this early in the morning. I was up before other people in the house, so I went to do this quietly. I don't have to turn on the kettle, which would wake people up. So this is a quieter way for me to do it. It doesn't have a lot of paint, so I figure it's not going to need a lot of stripping. And after using the paint stripper, I rinse it with water. That deactivates it and cleans the stripper off. And it came out pretty good. When I do this, the inside doesn't get stripped very well or at all. So I just left it because it's red. I'm going to be painting it the same color. I want to bring it back as a fairly ordinary restoration. The body casting is in excellent condition. It was a very good quality casting. There's a few places where there's voids, so I'm going to try and fill those in. So now I've got to make a base first of all, a new base. So I've taken a piece of paper and I'm just pressing with my fingers to get an impression of where the edges are. And I'm going to cut that out as a pattern. And then I got to find a piece of sheet metal to replace it with. Now while I'm cutting that, I'll tell you where I found my sheet metal. In the basement there's always little scraps of stuff that you don't want to throw away. I had a piece of aluminum trim where I had redone some old windows. Instead of replacing them, I repaired the wood by putting stock pieces of aluminum siding. And I had a piece left, and it's brown on one side and white on the other, and it's thin, so it's easy to cut with tin snips. And so there I cut a piece and trace around with the pencil of my pattern, and all that's left is to cut it out. Some of it I can cut with the tin snips, but there's a lot of stuff. I'm going to need this. This is a nibbler, and it has this little jaw that comes down, and so I can nibble little bits off. I've speeded this up until I get to the lines, and then once I've got it roughly done, I can file it and adjust it. So it's a quick little thing I showed there, but it took a while to file it down and get it to fit. Now I've got to get, there's folded up parts that hold the axle. So I've measured the thing up, and I measured, you could see at the beginning, I measured with the wheels on the axle how far apart it needs to be. So now I'm drilling and tapping. I'm going to put this thing onto a piece of wood, and this is in my milling machine, so I can precisely drill out and match the both sides. So I want to have it so that both sides are equal. So on the milling machine, I have a dial indicator in each direction so that I can take my measurements and put it in the right position and then drill a hole in each place. And I'm able to do it perfectly measured so that they come out exactly the same on both sides. There I measured for the center of the axle, and then I set my 0 point. And this way I'm able to measure and move it into the exact position. There you can see a little bit of the mathematics I had to go through to get the thing right, do my adjustments, my calculations. And I get my axle holes in just the right spot. So with those holes drilled, I can saw to the edges, and they'll have a radiused corner, which is what the original sheet metal has as well. And then it's a bunch of filing to get it to the right shape, measuring constantly. This is measuring for where the fold is going to be. So I get my parallel flat ground pliers, which are great for small sheet metal work like this. And I've got my dimension correct. And I can test fit it with the axle. And there we go, fits perfectly. Now I've got to make that front the same depth as the axle positions on the back, and so I just mark it with a pencil, and then I'm taping it up. And to do this, there's two ways you could do it. I could do it with super glue and baking soda, which is a nice handy way of doing things. In this case, I'm going to use JB Weld, which is a epoxy, metal containing epoxy. And so I'm taping it up so that I'll have a minimal amount that I'm going to have to grind and sand off. So you're probably happy that I've got this thing speeded up, because this was kind of painstaking just to tape this thing up. You can see the height was set with the first piece of tape, so when I put the axle there, it's already at the correct height. Now I've got a little bit of non-stick baking paper, and wrapping it around the axle and tape it in place with a little piece of masking tape, and put that in there. And that's going to be, that's not going to, the JB Weld won't stick to that. And so I'll be able to take the axle out and leave a nice clean edge where the paper is. So this is the JB Weld. I had this for a long time because I had it from before, and this was a brand new package that's been sitting there for a couple of years because I haven't needed it in all that time, but here we go. So again, I'm using an old credit card. I recycle them and they make nice glue spreaders and mixers for epoxy. And I can always cut whatever shape I want and it doesn't cost me anything, so I save all of the old credit cards for doing that. So while I'm at it, I've got some JB Weld mixed up, put a piece of tape, and I also fill that hole that was drilled into the top of it. So now this is the next day, because JB Weld takes a while to cure, so it's left overnight. And there I get the axle out and the paper just comes right out. Now there's a lot of overspread there, but the JB Weld is soft enough that you can still cut it with a knife. I think it probably hardens over a few days, but I was able to cut it easily with a knife, and the rest of it is pretty much perfect because I had it up against the tape like a form. A little bit of damage on the roof over the driver's window, so I try to clean it up with a file, and this time I go to the Bondo glazing putty. And then I can sand it down, smooth it out. And you can see I put it in a couple of other places where the casting had some voids. So that was another fair bit of work that I've shortened up for you so you don't have to watch for quite so long. Now on this one, I'm not drilling it in the milling machine because that father who repaired this before already drilled these out, so I just drilling them out a little bit bigger. He used a smaller screw than I used, so I can broke another twist drill, but I broke it at the bottom of the hole, so I can still get a tap in there deep enough so that I can put in one of my normal size screws, which is the smallest 440 button head cap screw I could find. So the screws fit in there, so now they'll stay in there, so while I'm painting and doing other things, it'll protect the thread from getting clogged up with junk. So I'm putting primer on. This is the Tamiya fine primer, and for the base I'm going straight with the semi-gloss black paint that I use now for all of my Dinky bases. It goes on easy and makes a beautiful finish. So here priming the wheels. I may or may not have put both sides of the wheels on this shot because you have to flip the wheels over after they've dried and paint the other side of them. So here I'm outside. I'm using this is the Tremclad professional Tremclad paint. This is the best paint I've ever used. I used it on a vise and I thought it would be too thick paint for the Dinky toy, but I tried it here and it's the most beautiful finish I ever got on the first try painting one of these toys. You can see how beautiful that paint is. So here I've got my Mr. Mark setter. And I put a little bit on the back of the paper because then it also spreads it as I take the decal off of the backing paper. So that went on pretty good. I find I'm still learning to do the decals, whatever you call them, and I have a lot of trouble because I want them to float, but they tend to quickly glue themselves down and don't want to move. So anybody wants to comment or send me to some nice video that shows tips on how to do these decals so that you don't wind up with too much trouble, I would be happy to be guided there. So these are decals I got from Steve Flowers and his what is it, Model Parts. I'm sure most of you already know about him. I find I can get most of the things I need from him, and it's always very high quality parts and high quality waterslide decals. So I'm used to using the Mr. Setter on here. And I'm thinking I didn't leave it long enough in the water. So that went on nicely. So then I go in and I cut out a lot of it, but I go in and smooth out the decal and squeeze the water out from behind it, and then blot it up with a little bit of tissue paper. And then I move on to do the other side as well. So there we have one side and the other, and it looks gorgeous. The paint is stunning. I find that the camera is not able to capture it very well because it's such a perfect finish. There's no little flaws that will give it the camera something to focus on, or to have different shades of colors. It always looks like a big solid mass of color because the paint is so perfect. So I'm going to paint these little domes. I'm taping it up not because I'm going to paint to the edges of the tape, but I'm just paranoid I'm going to screw up the paint job with my silver paint and blot it onto the red paint. So an abundance of caution, I'm going in here and using the Tamiya flexible curvable masking tape, which is like a white electrical tape. So it's stretchy and it peels off beautifully. It hasn't yet stripped any of the paint off of my model when I've used it. So it's also a kind of a safe masking tape. I love this stuff. I'm probably going to buy some wider ones, so in a case like this, I don't need to use two halves to to do the masking. So there I've masked them up, and then I've got those blocks in between. This is like massive overkill. When you see the way I paint these things, I don't even try to get to the edges. The original models were painted, and you can see that they also didn't try even to go to the edges. They just painted onto the top of the dome, which winds up looking terrific anyway. So I'm using the Molotov marker, and what I've learned from other rebuilders, just use it directly from the pen. It gives you a lot of control, and you're just drawing like you're drawing with a pencil crayon or something. Here I could have held the model down a little bit better because it kept moving on me. Still thinking about trying to find a nice little vise that, even if I make one with a 3D printer, might be the best idea, because I want it to be plastic and soft so that I can hold the toy, but I want to be able to move it around in the right position for doing stuff like this. When you're doing these, that's what you're thinking about. You're going, gee, I would need something to hold this thing down because the model keeps moving as I'm painting it. So I have three sizes of these markers, and it's very handy using this pointy one for doing stuff like this, the details like the hood ornaments or the door handles. I don't do the door handles on this one, and I don't do the rear bumper because the rear bumper was not painted by Dinky. So this one I've made it although it's shinier paint, but basically it's the same details that were painted by Dinky. So it's a fairly accurate restoration. So now we get the base ready. I'm missing axles, so the one axle I'm using, the back one, is from another model. Um, I think it was for the Vanguard. So the rear axle for the Vanguard, I was polishing it and it flew out of my hand onto the floor, and so I couldn't find it. I got out a pop rivet, made a new axle, so the Vanguard has a pop rivet axle, but then I found the axle later, put it in a box, and guess what? It fits perfectly on here. But the front one, I don't have an axle. The wheels, which are now painted red, uh, those are steel wheels I bought from Steve Flowers, and those were painted from scratch, so they're brand new. And there's really no other option in this case unless I had some spare wheels hanging around, which I don't. So now to mushroom the end, I've got to put the wheels on here, and then I put my vice grips to hold the axle. And these vice grips, you can see I've ground a little notch in the one jaw so that it holds it more tightly. And then I come in with my little hammer and hammer away. So after it's been mushroomed with the hammer, I've got this little tool I made. I ground out a little hollow. I put the power drill in hammer drill mode, and some people just use this in order to make the mushroom, but I find it's easier to hammer the mushroom, and then this just cleans it up and makes it nicely rounded like the original would look. And then I polish it up on the big grindstone polishing wheel. So there we go. It's a beautiful mushroom. Looks just like the one from the factory. So for tires, obviously I had no tires on this one. I've got 4 of these O-rings. These are O-rings for some plumbing function, and so it's very cheap to buy a whole bag of 50 of them, and they are the most beautiful Dinky tires for these models from the 40s. I searched for a long time to find this size, and I was very fortunate to find out that there is some purpose for this size of O-ring, and therefore you can buy a bag of 50 for a few dollars and then wait for them to come from China. So time to reassemble. It's a fairly simple model. It would have been a lot more simple if I didn't have to build my own base and repair the hole and the ground out front axle supports. So the base goes on, no lettering on the base, which kind of looks odd, but it fits beautifully. And I think it's an adequate repair. So let's remind you of what we started out with. So this is the toy as I got it. It's got those weird plastic spools as wheels, and it's got that block of wood inside, the sheet metal on the bottom, and the screw sticking out the top. So let's see what it looks like now. Now it looks back to what it looked like when it first came out of that yellow box and purple tissue paper. Perfect coat of paint. Would have had these nice decals freshly mounted. Just a gorgeous toy that any child would just love to have. This has been a pleasure to restore this model to what it would have looked like originally from the poor condition it was in. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Timo's Dinky Detailing, If you could like, share, and subscribe to my channel, that's the sort of encouragement that keeps these videos coming. So until next time, be seeing you.